Okay, polynomial division. So when you're dividing polynomials, it's like a fancy way of factoring. Okay, so we're first going to talk about dividing a polynomial, so a bunch of different terms, by a monomial, so divided by one term. So literally in these types of problems, all you're going to do is take whatever you're dividing by and divide each term by that thing. So I'm going to divide everything by 10n squared. And what you're essentially doing is like factoring out 10n squared as your GCF. It's the same process. Okay, so what you're going to do is literally simplify. So 30 divided by 10, that becomes 20, and then n to the fifth over n to the second, that becomes n to the third. So I get 20 n to the third. And I'm going to simplify the next one. So 40 divided by 10. Why did I put 20? Oh my goodness, sorry. 30 divided by 10 is 3. And then 40 divided by 10, that's 4. N to the fourth divided by n to the second, that's n squared. And then 20 divided by 10, that's 2. N to the third divided by n to the second is just n. And then you're done. That's it. So like in number 2, I'm going to divide everything by 6n. So I get 6 divided by 6, those cancel out. Then n to the third divided by n. Remember, you do 3 minus 1, which is 2. N to the third is bigger, so n squared is going to stay up top. Then 30 divided by 6, that's 5. N squared divided by n, that's n. And then 6n divided by 6n is just 1. And there's your final answer. Let me do one more, just because I want you to see when it doesn't always divide out evenly. So let's say I had 5n to the fifth plus 2n to the third minus 6n to the seventh divided by 2 n to the, let's say, 6th. Okay, and then I'm going to divide everything by 2n to the 6th. I'm just going to simplify each one. So 5 divided by 2, we can't simplify that, so that's going to stay as 5 over 2. Then I have 6 minus 5, which is 1, but 6 is the bigger exponent, so n to the first has to stay on the bottom. Okay, then I'm going to go on to the next one. The 2's cancel, and then 6 minus 3, that's 3, but 6 is the bigger one, so n to the third stays on the bottom. Since there's nothing on top, we put a 1. Okay, and then 6 divided by 2, that's 3. 7 minus 6, that's 1, so n to the first stays up top. So it's okay if you have fractional answers, okay? That's actually going to happen quite often, and you just leave them as is if you can't simplify them any further. Okay, now we're getting into polynomial division when you divide a polynomial by a binomial. So now we're dividing by 2 terms. Okay, before I do this, I want to refresh your memory on long division. Okay, so the method we're going to learn right now is the long division method. And let's talk about when you divide numbers by long division. So let's say I had 243 divided by, let's say, 8. Let's do a smaller number. Let me change this. Let's do 357 divided by 3. Okay, so you would put 3 out here, and you'd put 357 inside of here, right? Then you ask yourself, how many times can 3 go into 3? That's 1. So then you put the 3 below, right? Because 1 times 3 is 3. You subtract, and then you bring this down to figure out, okay, now how many times does 3 go into 5? That's 1. So multiply 3 times 1, that's 3. Subtract to get your remainder. 5 minus 3, that's 2. Then you're going to bring down the 7. And then how many times does 3 go into 27? Well, that's 9. You do 9 times 3, that's 27. Subtract, and I have a remainder of 0. So I'm going to do that same exact process, but now I have polynomials and I have variables. Okay, so whatever you're dividing by, so we're dividing by x plus 2, I'm going to put that on the outside, and the long polynomial is going to go inside of here. Okay, and what you need to do is you're going to look at this x and this x only, and you're going to start at the very first spot, just like I do here. I'm looking at the 3, and I only look at the very first number, which is 3. Okay, and I ask myself, how many times can x go into x squared? Or, think of it like this, what can I multiply x by to get x squared? Well, I could multiply by x. Just like I did over here, I figured out 3 goes into 3 one time. I did 1 times 3 to get 3 right here. I'm going to do the same thing. I need to multiply x times what I'm dividing by to figure out what goes below. So x times x, that's x squared, and then I'm going to do x times 2, that's 2x. Okay, well, remember, over here, to get to the next step, I had to subtract these two numbers right here to get my remainder. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. I have to subtract both of these two terms. So I'm going to minus the x squared, and now I'm going to minus the 2x. So the x squareds cancel, so these first ones should always cancel out. Now I have negative 7x minus 2x. We can combine those, right? That becomes negative 9x, not x squared. When we're adding and subtracting, we don't change the exponents. Okay, and then once you get that remainder, look what we did. Here I got a remainder of 0, then I dropped down the 5 to get the next place. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I have to drop down the 18. Let me do it in a different color. So negative 18, and I'm going to go back to the beginning. So I'm going to look at this x, and I'm going to look at this first term. What can I multiply x by to make it negative 9x? Well, that's negative 9. So you're going to multiply negative 9 times x, and you're going to multiply negative 9 times 2. Okay, then you have to subtract both of these terms. Well, if I'm subtracting negative 9x, that's a double negative, that becomes positive. If I'm subtracting negative 18, that's a double negative, that becomes positive. So these cancel and these cancel, so I actually have a remainder of 0. Because I have no other terms to pull down, I just have a remainder of 0. So my final answer is what's up here, which is x minus 9. What that is saying, what you just did, is you factored this polynomial right here. Right? If I were to factor x squared minus 7x minus 18, that would be x minus 9, x plus 2, right? Negative 9 and positive 2 multiplied to be negative 18 and add to be negative 7. So these are giving me the two factors of that polynomial. Now, you can't always factor these polynomials, so you can't use the shortcut and try to factor them every single time to figure out what your answer is, because sometimes these polynomials aren't factorable, and that's how we figure out what the other factor would be. Okay, so let me walk through this for you again. So I'm dividing by n plus 4, and inside is n squared minus 2n minus 24. So I'm going to start with the n and the first term. So what times n would get me n squared? N. So then you have to multiply this by n and by the 4. So I get n squared plus 4n. Okay, once you get underneath, you then have to subtract. So minus the n squared and minus the 4n. So the n squareds cancel, and I get negative 6n, and then I'm going to drop down the negative 24. Okay, so start from the beginning. I'm looking at only the n and this first term. So what times n gets me negative 6n? That's negative 6. So negative 6 times n, that's negative 6n. Negative 6 times 4, that's negative 24. And we subtract to find our remainder. So minus negative 6n, that becomes positive, minus negative 24, that becomes positive. These cancel, and I have a remainder of 0, so that means my final answer is n minus 6. Okay, let's do it again. So k plus 5 is on the outside. Then I have k squared minus 4k minus 47 on the inside. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. What times k gets me k squared? Well, that's k. So these always need to match. So k times k is k squared. If you're not getting these to match, then you're doing something wrong. Okay, so k times k, that's k squared. Then I got to do k times 5, that's positive 5k. Then when you subtract, you have to subtract both terms. So minus k squared, and this becomes now minus 5k. So these cancel, and I have negative 9k. And then we need to drop down this negative 47. And I'm going to go back to the beginning. So I'm looking at the k only. I don't care about the 5 right now. What times k gets me negative 9k? Well, that's negative 9. So negative 9 times k, that's negative 9k. Negative 9 times 5, that's negative 45. And we're going to subtract both terms. So minus negative 9k, that becomes positive. Minus negative 45, that becomes positive. These need to cancel. Again, if those front terms aren't canceling, you're doing something wrong. And then negative 47 plus 45, that's negative 2. Now, when you guys were in grade school, you probably would do r negative 2 if you had a remainder. But what we're going to do instead is we're going to bring that negative 2 up. And we're going to put it over what you're dividing by. So it's going to be minus 2 because it's negative 2 over whatever we divided by, which was k plus 5. So your final answer is going to be k minus 9 minus 2 over k plus 5. Again, it's minus 2 over k plus 5 because it was negative 2. So this would be an example of where you can't factor. When you end up getting a remainder, that means that that polynomial wasn't factorable, so you can't just factor to try to figure out the answer. Okay, number 6. I'm dividing by x minus 4. And I get x cubed minus 3x squared minus 8x plus 10. Okay, so this one's going to be a little bit longer. So what times x gets me x cubed? That's x squared. And now I got to multiply it by the x and the negative 4. So x squared times x, that's x cubed. X squared times negative 4, that's negative 4x squared. So these need to all be like terms. So I'm going to subtract both of these. So I'm going to minus the x to the third. And I'm going to minus the negative 4x squared, so that becomes positive. So these cancel, and I get x squared left. And I got to drop down the next place. Okay, and then you're going to start over. So what times x gets me x squared? That's positive x. So I'm going to take that x, and I'm going to multiply by x, and I'm going to multiply by negative 4. So x times x, that's x squared. X times negative 4, that's negative 4x. Okay, and then I got to subtract both of those. So minus the x squared and minus the 4x, negative 4x, that becomes positive. And so the x squareds cancel, and I get negative 4x left. And then we still have one more place that we have to drop down. So we got to drop down that positive 10. And you got to start all over. So looking back at just the x and this first term, what times x gets me negative 4x? That's negative 4. And you multiply the negative 4 by the x and the negative 4. So negative 4 times x is negative 4x. Negative 4 times negative 4, that's positive 16. Okay, and then you got to subtract both of those. So subtracting this becomes positive, subtracting this, it becomes negative. So I get -6 as my remainder. So -6, and it's got to go over what you're dividing by. Okay, so my final answer is what's up top. So x squared plus x minus 4 minus 6 over x minus 4. Okay, so what I want you to do is do the U-try. So pause this and then come back in and check and see if you got the same thing. So in number 7, I'm dividing by a monomial, so one term. So all I have to do is divide everything by 4b. So then I'm going to look to simplify. So the 4's cancel out. B to the 5th over B to the 1st, so 5 minus 1, that's 4. So B to the 4 stays up top because that's where the bigger exponent is located. Then 20 divided by 4, that's 5. B to the 4th over B, that becomes B to the 3rd. And then 2 over 4, that becomes 1/2. Not 2 over 1, it's 1 over 2. And then 3 minus 1, that's 2. So that's B squared up top, and then there is your final answer. Okay, number 8, now we're dividing by a binomial, so we have to use long division. So x minus 2 is going to go on the outside. Okay, and then you're looking at the x and asking yourself, what times x gets me x to the 3rd? Well, that's x squared. So then I'm going to multiply x squared by x and by the -2. So x cubed minus 2x squared. And then I have to subtract both of these. So minus, minus, that becomes positive 2x. So I get x squared left. Drop down the next term. Okay, go back to the beginning. What times x gets me x squared? That's positive x. Multiply that by both of these. So I get x squared minus 2x. Remember, we're subtracting both of those terms, so minus x squared and minus the -2x. Well, that double negative becomes positive. So these cancel, and I have x, and then drop down the 7. And then go back to the beginning. What times x gets you x? Well, that's just 1. So multiply 1 times x, 1 times -2. Subtract the 2, so minus, minus, that becomes positive, and I get -5. Okay, since there's nothing else to bring down, this is my remainder, so minus 5 over x minus 2. So if this was a positive remainder, then it would be plus 5 over x minus 2. Okay, so your final answer is x squared plus x plus 1 minus 5 over x minus 2. Okay, synthetic division. So this is a shortcut to long division. Yes, you have to know how to do both because long division can be used no matter what, and synthetic division can only be used sometimes. So the only time synthetic division works is when there's no lead coefficient. Well, what you're dividing by. So there's no lead coefficient in what you're dividing by, and it's a linear binomial. So let's say that I was dividing by 2, and this was 2x squared. Okay, because there's a coefficient of 2, and because this is bigger than 1, linear means a degree of 1, so since this is squared, you cannot use synthetic division. Okay, but in all these examples, obviously you can use synthetic division because it's got an exponent of 1 and there's no number in front. Okay, so here's the shortcut. It's super easy. It's kind of confusing in the beginning, but once you pick it up, it's going to save so much time. So, synthetic division. I'm going to look at this number right here, and I'm going to put the opposite of it in this little box thing in the top left corner. Then, make sure this is in order from highest degree to smallest, so highest exponent to smallest. and you're just going to write the coefficients. So that means you're just going to write the numbers in front of the variable. So I'm going to write 5, 58, and 80. Okay, then I'm going to draw a line, and this one's going to be addition. Okay, this one isn't subtraction like long division. And then what you're going to do is bring down this first number below the line. From there, you're going to multiply the number below the line to the number in the box. So I'm going to do 5 times negative 10, which is negative 50, and I'm going to put it in the next blank space. So what you're going to do is add those two numbers together. So 58 plus negative 50, that's 8. Every time you get a number below the line, then you got to multiply that number by the number in the box. So I'm going to do 8 times negative 10, which is negative 80, and I'm going to bring that in the next blank space. I'm going to add those two together, and I get 0. Okay, so this is actually giving me my answer. You just kind of have to fill it out. So what this is giving me is the coefficients to my answer. I just have to figure out where my variables go. So if you look at originally what is in here, see how it's dividing with an x squared? So your answer is always going to start with 1 degree lower than that. So my answer, instead of starting with an x squared, it's going to start with an x, and you're just going to go down the line. So it's going to go x, and then after x is usually something without a variable, so it's 5x, and the last number is always your remainder, and in this case the remainder is 0, so my final answer is 5x plus 8. Now, let's say we were dividing with something that was x to the 4th. That means that my answer would start with something with x to the 3rd, and then it would go x squared plus x plus some number. Okay, let me do it again with something a little bit longer. So I'm always looking at this, and the opposite of that is going to go in my box. So instead of negative 7, I'm going to put positive 7 in this top left box. I'm going to make sure this is in order, and I'm just going to write the coefficients. So I get 10, negative 72, make sure you're tagging on those signs, 8, and 48. I'm going to put my addition sign. Always make sure to drop this first number below the line. Do not forget that step. So this first number always below the line. Okay, then you're going to multiply the number below the line to the number in the box. So 7 times 10, that's positive 70. Then you're going to add those two numbers together. So I get negative 2. Then you're going to do 7 times negative 2, that's negative 14. That goes in the next spot, and you're going to add those two together, and I get negative 6. Then 7 times negative 6, that's negative 42. Sorry. Negative 42, then you're going to add those two together, and you get positive 6. So since I started with an n to the 3rd, my answer is going to start with an n to the 2nd. So this is n to the 2nd, this is n, that's my number, here's my remainder. So let me write it out as an actual answer. So my answer is 10n squared minus 2n minus 6, and then since my remainder is positive, I'm going to add that on at the end, and we're going to put it over what we divide by, which is n minus 7. Okay, lastly, here I have negative 5, so in the box I'm going to have positive 5. Everything's in order, so I'm going to write my coefficients. So 6, negative 36, positive 35, negative 25. Okay, drop down that first number below the line. Then you're going to do 6 times 5, so I get 30, so it's going to go in the next blank spot. Add those two together, I get negative 6. Negative 6 times 5, that's negative 30. Add those two together, I get positive 5. Then you're going to do 5 times 5, which is 25. Add those two together, I get 0. Well, my problem started with r to the third, so my answer is going to start with 1 less, r squared. Then you're going to go down the line, that's going to be r. Then it's just your number. My remainder is 0, so my final answer is 6r squared minus 6r plus 5. Okay, go ahead and do the try. Try to see how quickly you could get it done, because this truly is a shortcut. You could get these problems done in a few seconds. And then come back and see if you get the same thing as me. So I'm going to put -4 in the box. My coefficients are 9, 32, -9, and 26. Always bring down the first number underneath the line. -4 times 9, that's -36. Add those together, I get -4. -4 times -4, that's 16. And then I get +7. And then -4 times 7, that's -28. So I get a remainder of -2. So my answer is going to start with n squared, n plus 7 minus 2 over my remainder of n plus 4. Let me write that a little bit neater. Minus 2 over n plus 4. And there's our final answer. Now, if you did this in long division, you would get the same exact thing. It would just take a little bit longer. And yes, you're going to have to use both on your homework. Sorry. Like I said, long division always works. Synthetic only works in certain situations.